Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, moni muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We're coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so very happy and so very honored that you're joining us in our mission to help families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the podcast. Please tell your kids' teachers, their librarians, the principal, and also please subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Amazon Music, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, wherever you get your podcast. Our guest today is Donna Washington. She's returning to the show to celebrate Boo Stew. Before we invite Donna into the studio, we want to let you know that this episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast is brought to you by The Visitors, a thrilling middle grade novel written by Greg Howard. In The Visitors, the spirit of a 12-year-old boy spends his days stuck at the deserted Hollow Pines plantation in the South Carolina Low Country, with no recollection of his name, how long he's been there, no idea how to leave. But when visitors around his age from the living world arrive, the boy feels a spark of hope. As the visitors investigate a mystery of their own for a podcast, the boy's long-buried memories begin to shake loose. He wonders if maybe they could help him uncover the dark secrets of his past in hopes of finding a way to finally move on. But Hollow Pines doesn't like visitors, and with a malevolent spirit lurking in the shadows and painful memories buried deep, and for good reason, the boys wonder if he'll ever find his way home or be stuck in Hollow Pines forever. Talk about a perfect book to read in October. Get your copy today. The Visitors, a great middle grade novel by Greg Howard. This episode of the podcast is also brought to you by Why Should I Climb This Tree? An inspiring picture book written by Ryan Hogan. Why Should I Climb This Tree encourages our kids to rediscover the environment and all that it offers. A young boy can't understand why climbing a tree would be any fun or why it would be a good use of his time. His father, who's a veteran of climbing many trees, is determined to show his son why it matters. A story that's accessible to all ages, accompanied by wildly colorful and evocative illustrations. Why Should I Climb This Tree could be the antidote for the impediments delivered to our children from excessive use of digital screens and social media. Urging children to go outside and play, the climbing tree is a metaphor for life. The boy discovers much about his abilities and how connecting with nature can elicit feelings of confidence, positivity, and peace like nothing else can. This is a great addition to any family library. You should pick it up today. Why Should I Climb This Tree by Ryan Hogan. Join us right now from the beautiful state of North Carolina. Our guest is here today to celebrate her picture book. It's called Boo Stew. Please welcome back to the podcast, Donna Washington. Hey, Donna, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you, Jen. It's nice to be here.
It's great to have you back. I just loved our last conversation talking about your books, talking about storytelling, and I can't wait for you to tell us about Boo Stew.
Well, the Boo Stew was a really fun, it was a fun project when it started, which was years ago. My children are both chatty people. And when they were my son must have been 8, my daughter 5, we were sitting at the breakfast table and my son is a picky eater. He barely eats anything now and he's 25 now, but he's just a picky eater. And so, my daughter is like a truck driver. She eats anything. So they're really opposite. And so they're at the table and my daughter is listing off food that most people would eat. And my son's like, I wouldn't eat that. Mm-hmm. So then she was asking, well, why wouldn't you eat it? And then he starts naming off things that nobody would eat and saying that the food she's describing sounds like that. Now, to be fair, my son liked peanut butter and turkey sandwiches. I mean, so he also ate stuff that nobody would eat.
Okay. I need to clarify this. Now, your son liked peanut butter sandwiches and turkey sandwiches, or together?
No, he would peanut butter and turkey on the same sandwich.
Okay, I'm speechless.
So he would but the thing that we found out about him is he's a texture eater.
Ah.
So you put some things in his mouth and he's good, but there's lots of things that he puts in his mouth and he has a really strong vasovagal response. In other words, and so he would, even if it tasted okay, it would make him ill. He would become physically ill. It's a texture thing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, they're talking about this. And so as I'm listening to them, I start asking questions like, who would cook such terrible food? And before long, they had come up with a story and they were playing with it. And then I sat down and started listening. And, I started throwing things in there. And eventually it turned into this little story that was vaguely reminiscent of Little Red Riding Hood and vaguely reminiscent of Goldilocks and the Three Bears, and vaguely reminiscent of a lot of the folklore that we play with.
Mm-hmm.
But there was enough to it that I started messing with it and eventually started telling it on stage. And I have a number of stories like that went from my kids to the stage. And I was performing it somewhere, and then my buddy Carmen Didi heard me and was like, have you ever considered putting that in a book? And I thought, absolutely not. No, I had never thought about that. I can't, because it was such an interactive story.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much that I get out of the audience. I couldn't imagine what that would look like being trapped on a page. And a lot of my spoken word material is like that. How do you capture all of the sort of fun of having people yelling things out and adding crazy stuff to a story? How do you put that on a piece of paper? So Boostu, eventually he started going through the process, and eventually we found ways to find the music in the language. And that's how we ended up with this book.
So neat. I love when stories just kind of grow, kind of like, a seed is planted and then it just grows. And there are so many stories that are like that. And I think especially from somebody like you who is out in front of audiences telling stories and sharing these tales with kids.
Yeah. The thing that is interesting is I've been doing this now for 35 years. So this is the only performing as a storyteller. It's the only job I have ever had. So as a grown up, right? So I graduated from university and this is really just all I do. And it took me a number of years to figure out, I could hear that people wanted to play with the stories with me, but it took me about, I would say 2 years to figure out how to do it. Mm-hmm. And then once I got into the habit of playing with people, I began to see where the stories needed to change. And so I'm always up for an audience teaching me something about stories. I'm always up for an audience teaching me something about language. And you just have to learn on the fly. You have to hear what it is they're hearing and figure out how it works with what you're doing. And sometimes that means that you have a story that gets taken completely off kilter by an audience. And then you try to get it, never works again. It's just that particular audience needed that story to be that way at that time. So you have to be aware that some of that happens. Mm-hmm. And when that happens, just let that piece go. Like that story that story happened that way that one time. Mm-hmm. So you're looking for things that can happen every single time. Yeah. You're looking for things that tapped into an audience continuously. Now you might get some random stuff that happens, but you're looking for the stuff that is solid in your story. And that becomes the core of what you're doing. And all of the random things that happen in a random audience, well, they're for that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. That's one of the neat things about performance is, and especially an interactive show like what you do, like what I do with my magic. It's, I had an international student tour with me for 3 weeks, me and my daughter. And we were going around, and so this young woman from Italy got to see my show 14 or 15 times. And at the end of the tour, she turned to me and she said, I've seen the show 15 times. You've never done the same show the same way. How do you memorize all these different shows? And I'm like, I walk out and things happen and it's magical.
Right. Cause it's one of those things where for me, this makes more sense. The improvisational nature of the work, the playing off of an audience, the give and take, the back and forth. I prefer that. Mm-hmm. But I know to people who memorize things, who like to know exactly what they're going to say, that must be terrifying.
Yeah.
Because you have no idea what the audience is going to do. Mm-hmm. But that's what makes it fun.
Yeah.
One of the things that has been difficult over the pandemic is I did an absolute ton of virtual storytelling. And, you can't have the volume up or you can't hear anyone. There's certain sounds you make online that don't transfer over to real life. You don't have the immediate question and answer. I think about some of my favorite performances where I'm doing my thing and one kid just stops the whole show because they can't even deal with something I just said. And then I have a mini conversation with one of them and go, that's interesting. And then you go on. And sometimes something they've said becomes part of the story. And sometimes it's just a moment. At one point I was doing why mosquitoes buzz in people's ears. And it's this story where all of these various animals it's a cumulative story. So the mosquito bothers the iguana, who then puts sticks in his ears. And then he bumps into the snake, and the snake calls the iguana doesn't hear him. And so the snake hides, but he hides in a rabbit hole, and rabbit thinks the snake's after him, and he runs out of the rabbit hole. And then he's running, so crow sees him running and thinks there's danger. So crow sounds this alarm, and the monkey hears the alarm and thinks that there is danger, and he runs across the treetops and steps on a branch, and the branch falls into Mother Owl's nest, and one of the owlets is hurt. So this first part takes almost 15 minutes to set up, and all the characters have their own sounds, their own sound effects, their own voice. And so I'm in it. It's really intricate character voice work going on. Then I say, and everybody knows that unless Mother Owl turns to the east and raises her wings and calls out, hoo, 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 the sun will not come up. There's a kid sitting in the front. He has dealt with the talking animals. He has dealt with all the strange noises coming out of my body. He's dealt with all of it. But when I said that the only reason the sun would come up is because the owl raised her wings, he could not go any further. And he said, wait a minute. That's not why the sun comes up. And I just stopped. I was like, you are correct. Mm-hmm. But the animals didn't know that. And he was like, oh, okay. But you don't get any of that when you're doing virtual telling. You get none of it, mm-hmm. right? Mm-hmm. If there's a kid who is confused, he's 4 screens over and his camera's not even on half the time. Mm-hmm. So you don't necessarily have that same thing.
Yeah.
So what would happen is that after I performed, they would do Q&A, and then the kids could ask me questions. But it just wasn't the same. So I am glad to be back in front of live audiences and be able to have those exchanges.
My first Zoom show, I have this thing where I make an egg appear, and it's very visual, appears inside a see-through bag, and it's empty. And then I ask a kid to do something, and then boom, right in front, no sleight of hand. It just boom, it's there. And it always gets this huge reaction. And I'm doing it on Zoom, and I'm looking, and there's 100 little screens and faces there. And I'm thinking, this is great. I always look forward to this. And the egg appeared, and there was no reaction at all. And I am sitting there for 2 seconds, and I am horrified. It is the first time that I've been terrified on stage in at least 30 years. And I'm sitting there going, what am I going to do? And then all of a sudden, all at once, everybody just, whoa, great. And I realize, oh, there's a delay and I don't want to do this anymore.
Wow. Yeah, I could imagine that.
Yeah.
That would be something else.
Yeah.
Oh,
You mentioned that ability to go on stage and not knowing what was going to happen and actually looking forward to that. That's a really empowering moment, I think, for a performer when you kind of understand that. When you get to the point where you're walking out on stage and you're like, I don't know how this audience is going to react to me. I don't know how this is going to go. But in the end, I'm going to have fun. It's going to be 45 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, but I'm going to get through it. And in the end, we're going to have a story to tell.
yeah. Yeah. And the thing about the audience is they want to be there, right?
Mm-hmm.
They've come for stories or they've come for magic. It's not like someone like gathered a whole group of people and said, you need, you have to come here and watch this. So they know what they're going to see. And to be fair, I was also trained as an actress back in the day. So I'm not as freaked out about not having an audience there, because, I've been trained to perform, right? So I think that actually helped me a lot. Like a lot of my storyteller friends had a real big problem when there was no audience they could play off of. And by the end of the pandemic, it had occurred to the people that, bandwidths being what they are, they would just put me there and they would have a meeting situation where I wouldn't even see the kids, right? So I'm just performing and I don't even see pictures of other people's faces. And so for those situations, I would just imagine the best audience ever. I would imagine the audience that responds exactly the way I want them to respond to whatever I'm doing. I imagine they're laughing at my ridiculous jokes and that they get all the innuendo. I would just imagine that I had the perfect audience and I would perform for that audience, which is not the same thing as performing for who's sitting there. But for the kids, in a lot of ways, I look like a television show. So for them, it was they're so used to staring at screens that won't interact with them. I don't think they had a sense that I was supposed to be interacting with them. It's a really different medium. Kids, I have a lot of YouTube material. So kids have often watched me on YouTube before they watched me on Zoom. So in some ways it was the same thing in a kind of weird kind of way, except that afterwards they could talk to me. So I don't miss Zoom performing. And I can't because I'm still doing it. I don't know if you're still doing Zoom performing. But I say about 40% of my work is still virtual.
Wow. Yeah. Actually, the podcast is pretty much keeping me very, very busy these days. But I do love getting out there in front of an audience. You and I have been doing this for a long time. How has not have the audiences changed, but have you had to change what you're doing because of what's going on in society at all?
Well, one of the things that's happened, and it's only happened a couple of times, and I don't know if it's going to happen a lot more. I'm hoping we're coming to the backswing of this pendulum, is that as a Black performer, a couple of times I have had people concerned that I was going to talk about critical race theory. And the couple times it's come up, I have said, you do know that critical race theory is taught in grad school law classes, right? And we're going to be dealing with like third graders. I promise you, I will not be talking about graduate law courses with third grade. Now, here's the thing. People don't know what CRT is, or they have some really terrifying view of it. So if I'm basically, I am daring someone to tell me that they don't, that's not what they think it is. That they think it's like you're not allowed to talk about Black people or some crazy thing like that. But anytime I actually articulate what critical race theory is and say, I'm not going to be talking about that. I know I can see like the wheels going in their head going, I don't think that she knows what I'm talking, like they can't articulate the thing that they're scared of because it has nothing to do with critical race theory.
Yeah.
So that is a thing that's happened over the last couple of years. But nobody has ever canceled a show or complained about anything that I have done in relation to that. So I don't know if it's going to come up again. I'm hoping that the crazy pendulum is swinging away from that kind of nonsense, but I don't know if it is or not.
Yeah.
Like I said, still about 40% of my work is virtual. And I'm performing all over the world like that.
Yeah.
So I think that that's another thing that has changed. I don't think I will ever not be performing virtually.
Yeah.
Because there's so many places that simply can't get me there, but they would like me to teach something. They would like me to perform something. And we can work it out virtually. So I'm still working virtually in a lot of ways. And another thing that changed is over the pandemic, I co-founded with Sheila Arnold, a 501c3 called Artists Standing Strong Together.
Artists Standing Strong Together.
Right. And we founded it because right as the pandemic hit, we have a national organization called the National Storytelling Network. And we were wondering, like, what was he going to do? Like, was he going to, like, I don't know, reach out? We didn't know. But we didn't hear from that group. And a lot of storytellers live gig to gig. Right? So when the pandemic hit, the bottom line just fell out of a whole lot of people's buckets. They had no idea. If you do this full time and you're an in-person performer and then suddenly you can't be in person, how do you make a living? So I saw immediately what happened to my bottom line in 24 hours. And, I started getting people contacting me going, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? What do we do? And I was like, I don't know. I don't know what we do, but we'll figure it out. And then a buddy of mine and I realized that I was trying to send out hopeful messages out, and she was doing the same thing. And we ended up bumping into each other in one of these chat rooms. And we said, well, somebody needs to do something. And if you make that statement,
you got to be the one.
Maybe you should do something.
Yep.
So the two of us, we met at the very last national festival before all the conferences, before everything closed down, the women's festival. And we chatted for about 20 minutes and the idea was born. And that next Monday, we'd sent out emails to storytellers going, if you want to talk about what we could do together, come. And like 70 people showed up. Wow. And that was our first Monday meeting. And since then, we have had Monday meetings every single Monday since the pandemic started.
Wow.
We ended up founding the Storytelling Relief Fund, which if you're a storyteller and you can't get to the end of the month, you can apply for short-term grant relief. And we don't have a ton of money we give out, but helping people pay for medicine. If you need that little extra to get your rent over, to pay your babysitter, whatever it is, you can apply for a small grant. And so we're working on building that up. Eventually, like our hope is that, like if you need an operation, you could contact us. So, small performers who don't necessarily have other options. So we established that. And then we established an actual, we're incorporated as a 501c3. So we can be, if you are doing, I don't know, national touring and you need a 501c3 to funnel the information through so that you can get paid, we offer that service. And we do 5 online programs every single month.
Wow.
They're all storytelling programs. And we also offer workshops. And the point of it is, what we discovered over the pandemic is there are people who would engage with storytelling and other types of oral art forms, but they don't know how to find it in real life, or it's too expensive where they live, or they can't get out. They have an accessibility issue. But as long as you have an internet connection, all of our performances are free. And we also do the Youth Standing Strong Camp, where we do an international online storytelling mentoring program. And so you have like storytellers from Nigeria working with kids from Canada or South America or someplace in Europe or Asia. And you get one-on-one 5-day mentoring session, one professional storyteller, one kid from anywhere in the world.
Wow.
And they work together. And at the very end, the kids do a performance. And it's a week-long thing. Has been an incredibly amazing experience. And we're in the process of like revamping our website and sort of rolling ourselves out as a real organization, even though we have been one for 2 years. We're sort of tucked away in a small corner, but we're getting ready to we have, it works. The process works, and we're about to like really sort of blast off and let people know that we're here and that we are available for just if you need someplace to be, if you want to hear stories, if you want to share ideas, if you want to do workshops. It's called Artists Standing Strong Together.
Artists Standing Strong Together. That's beautiful. I love that you took action. You did that thing. It's like someone should do something. I guess it's me. Because we need that. I mean, that was one of the things I'm, my beautiful wife and I are blessed in that, we're at a point in our lives. My wife just retired back in October. So in terms of finances, we're not rich by any means, but we haven't been rich our whole lives. So, we had to scrimp a little bit. We were able to do that, but we're in a much better position than so many other people. And I know, when the pandemic hit and my last gig before the pandemic, it was like, it was a library gig and the library was still going to be open and still going to be open. And I'm sitting there going, do I really want to do it? I do. I don't want to, I don't want to cancel, but I kind of hope they do. And then it ended up being canceled, and it was, kind of relief. But then also I'm like thinking, wow, there are a lot of my brother and sister performers out there who they're not married. They don't have anything to fall back on. And I still hope that, we're hopefully at the end of the pandemic. But I hope we don't. I know. Donna's giving me one of those storyteller looks like, really? One of those look to tell us 1,000 words without a word being said. I just hope whenever the pandemic is over, I hope that we don't forget the lessons that we learned, that we're not all in the same boat. We're going through the same storm, but we're all in very different circumstances, and we absolutely must have empathy for others, and whenever we can reach out and help lift everybody up and help us all get through these tough times.
Yeah. I am amazed at the way the stories move through our society. We understand in a time when we all need help that we all need to band together. At least we're mostly that way. I have been fascinated by the way we use stories to build ourselves up and also tear each other apart. Stories are a double-edged sword. And, that old story about the two wolves inside of us, the one that is, greedy and devouring and the one that's good and loving and they're always warring. And like which one is going to win. It's the one that you feed. And the question is, what is it you're feeding them? And for me, always the answer is stories.
Mm-hmm.
Which stories are you going to feed the wolves? Are you going to feed it the story where we're all together and we're working together? Or are you feeding it the story, somebody is out to get you?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You know, so like grab what you can. And I think usually things like this bring us closer together. And in some ways they have. But it's a little nervous to me that for some people, the answer to this was everyone else. No one should tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm.
I have no responsibility to society. I have no responsibility to other people's children. I'm only responsible for myself. Like somehow you are a civilization of one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know. I was disappointed in that,
Mm-hmm.
but people are people. And really I was struck by how the stories we believe and the stories we propagate really affect even how we live together through a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
So it has really made me even more determined to find ways to tell stories about how we work together and how we live together and how we overcome difficulties. That has become a much stronger thing in me since this happened. And also, I'm more determined than ever to tell histories. But like woven histories. You know, we have this thing where we have African American history, which is like a history that's apart.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have Native American history. And then we have, you know, everyone has their own history. But the truth is it's the same history. And all the people involved in it are all woven together. And the reason why this happens is because we decide that those people over there have a different thing going on.
Mm-hmm.
We're all living in this country together. We all have to figure this out.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm watching it across, not just America, across the world do this. And I'm thinking, why haven't we learned this yet? Mm-hmm. You know, we've been living in societies long enough to understand that stories can take us apart and they can bring us together. Why didn't we learn this yet? Mm-hmm. That it is so much better for us to try to work together. Anyway, that's an off topic, but no, it's a thing that really strikes.
Yeah, but I think it's an important point to make as often as we have a chance to make it. You know, I'm amazed we're living in a time where you're in North Carolina and I'm in Boston, and we're able to see each other and speak to each other through the magic of technology. But at the same time, we haven't figured out a way to make sure that each one of our neighbors is fed.
Yeah.
You know?
That's insane to me. That is insane that is true. Mm-hmm. And right now, I got to say, over the course of the pandemic, I keep using that term as if somehow, but I should stop. I should try to restructure that thought. Anyway, I became fascinated with Brexit, with what's going on in Britain, mm-hmm. because I could not understand how that happened. Like, why would you basically cut yourself off from your largest trading partner and then just decide you don't want to be part of a giant continent that's like right next to you? You're like a little island off the coast of a giant landmass with all of these countries, and you decided you're just going to go it on your own. Mm-hmm. I didn't understand that. And so I've been fascinated to try to understand that. And what's happening now, since I've been following this, the progress of this is, I call it, like, you know, we talk about false reality. Mm-hmm. The stories that you tell have nothing to do with reality, but you like the stories, so you keep telling them. And I have watched Britain sort of fall into this weird hole where they have lots of problems, and a lot of it is due to the story that they've told about why they went to Brexit. And now they have to solve those problems, but because they refuse to deal with what caused them, they're having a lot of problems solving the problems. So what happens when reality and stories kind of collide with each other?
Mm.
America is dealing with the same thing. Like, we have a lot of hungry children.
Mm-hmm.
And we also have a problem with homelessness.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't like to see that, and we don't talk about it. I've been wondering, the question that gets me when I'm driving to the grocery store and I see people standing on the corner and we're like, need help, whatever, with their signs. And I ask the question, if you get here, how do you get back into society?
Mm-hmm.
Like, how do you get back to a place where you are earning a living or renting an apartment, or how do you do that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what's the process? So we ought to know that.
Mm-hmm.
There ought to be a way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
These people should not be thrown away, like, anyway. So as a storyteller, I ask the question, why, what story are we telling that allows this to happen?
Mm. That's fascinating. One of the things that blew my mind when the pandemic started, and my beautiful wife and I are running around getting mobile hotspots to her students so they could learn online, and bringing food over to some of them. And I was reading something in the newspaper somewhere saying this statistic, 50 or 60% of the kids in Boston get the bulk of their meals in schools. And so how are they going to eat? And, and that, of course, that was a problem. But what blew me away was, why hasn't anybody said there's a problem? The kids getting half their meals at school. That's a problem. We need to feed them right now, but we need to fix that.
Right. Right. And the question becomes, is that the fix? That they decided that they're going to feed them at school? Is that the fix that we had? Like, and in fact, I just actually did an event for the National Conference of State Legislatures. And it's a bipartisan group that brings in senators and representatives from all the state legislatures around the country. And they engage in bipartisan discussions and that sort of thing. And I did one of the general session keynote speeches for them. And the hardest part for me was to not scold them.
You didn't want to go all Greta Thunberg on them?
That was not my goal. That was not my thing. My thing, of course, is to try to get them to think about governing it, actually, in terms of how we think about stories. But,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things I desperately want to say that I did not say was, okay, so we know we have a problem with child hunger. We know that that's a problem. So one of the ways a lot of kids get their food is through schools. That's a truism. So the first story is, I go into a school. It's in the District of Columbia, and it's almost all the kids there, minority of some kind. And I'm sitting in the office waiting to be taken down to the auditorium, and these two gorgeous little girls come in. Their hair is exactly the same. They have little barrettes. They're clearly siblings. One of them a couple of years younger, and so maybe like 7 and 5. And they come into the office and look up at the lady at the desk, and the oldest one says, "Our mother forgot to feed us this morning." And the lady at the desk goes, "Oh," and she takes out vouchers for breakfast and lunch. She hands them to the little girls, and they leave the office. That's illegal. She's not supposed to do that. Mm-hmm. You have to fill out a ton of paperwork in the DC area to get your kids vouchers, right? You have to prove that they deserve it. Plus, it's a Title I school. So you have to jump through a ton of hoops in order to get your kids fed at school. Mm. Second story. I'm out west somewhere in the Midwest. And it's Friday. I've been at the school performing, and I see all of these laundry baskets lined up outside of kids' lockers. And they're got grocery bags with food in. And I asked, what's that about? And they said, well, these kids won't eat again until Monday if we don't send these baskets home with them over the weekend. And I said, well, I don't, let them be forward, but don't you guys have like SNAP programs here or welfare or something? And they're like, oh, we do. But the parents are too proud to sign up for them because, of course, out there, the story is pull yourself up by your bootstraps. We don't need no stinking government help. So the parents won't apply for food stamps. So then the kids are hungry because the parents are too proud to feed them. Like, what kind of story do you have to believe to make your kids go hungry because you don't want anyone to help you? Ah! And so then the third story is I'm in upstate New York in a really wealthy suburb that has kids bust in and out. And I come in and every kid has a tray. And I'm like, you would think that I'd be in an area where everyone could feed their kids. And then the administrator says, oh no, in this district, every single kid gets breakfast and every single kid gets lunch because we don't want anyone to not, we don't want kids to be hungry. And B, we don't want to single any of the kids out. We don't want any kid being denied lunch or breakfast when they need it. And we don't want them to feel uncomfortable if they need it. Three completely different ways to deal with child hunger in the schools. I think the only one that works is the one in upstate New York, where every kid just gets fed. No questions asked. We have a lot of different ways to think about hunger. But the stories we have about hunger prevent us from actually solving the problem. Like the story of the guy on the corner with, I need help. We have stories about what that kind of person must be like. Right? The person who's working retail at like a low-end job. We have stories about they probably didn't get a good education. They probably didn't do this. Why are they working this job? They couldn't get any other kind of job. Must be the answer because otherwise, why would they work here? Now, I'm not saying that I have that thought. I'm just saying that I've seen people treat people like that, right? We see a banker. We assume, oh, he must be like, really smart and all this other stuff. But we know that's not true either. Some of these guys are great. So our stories about what people do and how they do it prevent us from solving problems that need to be solved. I'm in the process of writing at least one of these books, and I want to write the first one called No Magic Needed. And it's about how stories affect our brains. And because they're all linked into the limbic system, right? So our involuntary responses and how they're built on top of each other. So they're foundational, which is why if you challenge someone's basic beliefs about something, it's almost like stabbing them. Like our fight and flight instinct is hooked into our basic stories, which is why when you're having a conversation about politics or religion, people either fight you or run away from you.
That's why I don't talk about either of those things.
So I have been fascinated for years about how our stories either help us or hinder us. And so I'm, like I said, watching the Brexit thing, just watching it sort of unfold and my guessing, this is probably what's going to happen. And just watching it sort of unfold, I went, okay, I think I've figured enough about this in one thing, how stories work. I think I'm going to start writing books about this. So that is my next big personal project is I have at least 2 books to write. And one of them is called No Magic Needed because storytelling is not magic. And the second one would be The Two Faces of Story, talking about how you use it for good and how you use it for evil.
Well, we're certainly seeing that, especially play out in social media, how people are using stories to divide us. And it's so, it's terrifying. It's terrifying in a lot of ways. Hey, you know what else is terrifying, Donna? We've been sitting here speaking now for almost 45 minutes, and we're not halfway through our conversation. I think we could talk for another 10 hours, but I have another interview coming up. So we need to make sure we have time for you to tell the story of where people can go to find out more about you and more about your stories.
Okay. I'm sorry. If you start talking about storytelling, you can forget it.
I love it. I love it.
All right. I live on the internet at dlwstoryteller.com. And if you go to YouTube and type Donna Washington Storyteller into the little YouTube box, I will pop up and I will tell you stories over there.
Yeah. And if you do go to her YouTube page, you're just going to be sent down a beautiful rabbit hole of stories. You just make sure you give yourself half an hour, hour and a half, because you're not going to want to leave.
And if you are interested in artists standing strong together, we actually are like I said, we're in the process of revamping, but you can find us at artistsstandingstrongtogether.net. Yes. And eventually probably .org and .com and all of that sort of thing. But .net is where you can find us right now. And come to the Monday meetings just to hear about story practice and to meet other storytellers and writers and dancers. It's artists, just different kinds of artists. I will probably be around doing Boostu work, telling that story and sharing that book, and that stuff will be in the calendar. So if you want to figure out where I'm going to be at the Cape Clear Storytelling Festival the first week in September. I'm going to be at the Timpanogos Storytelling Festival the second week in September. I will be at various festivals in person as well as other public events and private ones. So all of that's on my calendar at dlwstoryteller.com.
That's wonderful. We've had a phenomenal time speaking to one of my favorite storytellers, Donna Washington. Please be sure to check out Boostu. And Donna, please be sure to come back and join us again.
As often as you'll have me.
Please be sure to join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Our guest will be Florence Ann Romano. She'll be here to encourage us to build our own village and let love in and ask for help. That's the next episode of the podcast. Hey, we should say thank you when people we ask for help us. And so we want to thank the folks who helped make today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guest, Donna Washington. Please be sure to check out Boostu. Also want to thank our sponsor, Brian Hogan, the author of Why Should I Climb This Tree? Great picture book that you and your kids will love. Also, we want to thank Greg Howard, author of the thrilling middle grade novel, The Visitors. I want to thank my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Mirabella Q. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. And as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.